The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the Sports Guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. Another freezing cold day here in Southern California. I don't know what's going on here. It's like the opposite of global warming, but that's not going to stop us from having Smart Guy Wednesday. In a little bit, Aaron Schatz from Football Outsiders is coming up. Right now from Grantland, our own Smart Guy, Bill Barnwell. What's happening?
A gorgeous day here in Boston until it starts snowing and raining in about 2 hours.
Oh, you're getting a little snow and a little rain?
We were getting a wintry mix, which is a phrase that does not come into play in Los Angeles, even on 40-degree days.
What kind of weather are we expecting in Sunday, New England night game, 6:30 p.m.?
Clear weather. I actually just checked. I will say today's weather, it says ice pellets, which is not a thing you want to see on the weather report. That just sounds like the world is ending.
Yeah. So we figured it'll be a little chilly. Those night games at Foxborough can get a little dicey. I look at this Ravens team. They played over 5 periods in Denver in 10-degree weather on Saturday. So they played like 5 1/3 period or whatever it worked out. It's really hard for me to believe they'll be in tip-top shape for this game. And I know this belies the whole stat analysis that we love to do here, but what is your take on this Baltimore team coming in?
Well, I mean, they've played now, I think, 80-plus snaps in consecutive weeks. I mean, they played a lot of snaps during that Colts game, so it was a pretty, active game. And then last week, I didn't expect them to win, certainly. I thought they were going to lose by probably 14 points. And I mean, they really are just a team that has something to lose at this point. We always talk about the idea that, there are these teams that nobody believes in, the oldest, or the most popular cliche in the book at this point. And the Ravens really are that team. If they lose, no one's going to think any less of them at this point. And I mean, everyone there is playing for either Ray Lewis or playing for a new contract. So it's sort of a weird team.
And Flacco is really the nobody believes in as quarterback, I would say. He was incredible in that Denver game. You were, when we did the trade value column before the season, you ranked Flacco a little higher than I thought he should have been ranked. As it turns out, I think if you do that column again, he's probably in the top 25, right?
Yeah, I think he was right around 30 or so in the trade value column.
He was 27.
Oh, wow. Good recall. And like he's one of those guys where you look at him and you say, oh, well, he's not really that good, but he's youngish. He's entering his prime now. He's never been hurt. He's played every game of his pro career, so he's always there. His numbers are average, but he's going to be, if he gets free agency, which I don't think he's going to hit free agency at this point, because I think the Ravens are just going to have to re-sign him, and they're going to have the cap room to do it after Ray Lewis retires. But if you think about it, that's a 27, 28-year-old quarterback hitting free agency in the prime of his career after leading his team to the AFC Championship game in back-to-back seasons. That just doesn't happen.
Yep.
So if he hits free agency, he's going to get paid by somebody. He's going to be a very valuable property, but I think he'll stay in Baltimore in the long run.
And I do think he's somebody that the stats don't totally tell the story, because he can throw the ball downfield, which opens the door for a team to do a lot of different things offensively. And you look at what happened with Denver in that Baltimore game. Did Peyton throw a pass more than 20 yards in that game? I really don't remember one of them.
20 yards in that game. I think, honestly, one of the hidden things about that game that people don't realize, or that people have forgotten, is that they lost Noshawn Moreno halfway through the game to a knee injury, and they had to pretty much go with either Ronnie Hillman or Jacob Hester on every down. And that, Jacob Hester is he's a good pass protector, but he's bad at everything else when it comes to football. And they kept giving him the ball in short yardage, and I felt like they didn't have a lot of confidence that their pass rush, or that their pass protection would hold up over the long run to give Peyton Manning the time to make those 20-yard, 30-yard throws.
And maybe he just can't make them in cold weather, because we certainly didn't see him. It felt like Baltimore's
D. At this point, he would have made them by now. He's been in the league, 15 years now? He can make cold throws. I'm not worried about that.
Baltimore's D seemed to be moving up as that game went along. Lombardi said on the podcast on Monday he didn't throw one 9 route, which I guess is that one. Once you decide that the quarterback's not going to make that throw, makes it a little bit easier. But as you said, the running game went out of whack. When you think like they got 2 special teams touchdowns, they still lost at home. It's really hard to do that. I would love to see a stat for 2 special teams touchdowns in the same game, and then the team lost. It's got it. What would it be like? 85%? You have to win.
I'll tell you. I looked it up during the game. I think it was 21-4 historically.
Wow. Is that playoffs or everything?
That's everything. I don't think there had been a playoff game where a team had got 2 special teams touchdowns in the same game before.
How about that guy getting waived by the Texans?
Getting waived, and the guy who the Texans picked up was Barrett Ruud, who was in coverage on that Shane Vereen touchdown, the second Shane Vereen touchdown catch for the Texans in New England on Sunday night.
You know what else was underrated? Because so much stuff happened last weekend that some stuff fell through the cracks. And coming out of that Niners-Packers game, everybody was just going crazy about Kaepernick, and with reason. He was unbelievable. But the fumble killed the Packers in that game. They were up 14-7, and the Niners were punting to them. Guy fumbles at like his own 8. Niners scored, game changes. But I just remember thinking when the Niners were punting in that situation, I was like, oh God, Rodgers is going to run. They're going to win this game 42-20. And that moment just kind of came and went in about a second. But when you were watching that game, I mean, now it seems like everybody's agreed, oh, the Niners are so much better. But as you were watching that game, didn't you feel like the Packers really had a chance to win?
They did, but the Packers and the Niners are such situational teams, where we've talked about it, and it's not really the case with Kaepernick as much, but when they had Alex Smith, they couldn't throw to catch up. Once they were down 14 points, game was pretty much over. I don't think that's the case with Kaepernick, but it was definitely the case with Alex Smith. I think we can all agree on that. I feel like when that happened, I remember thinking, oh well, the Packers got that pick 6. That doesn't mean anything. It's kind of like a trade off with the fumble and the immediate touchdown. So it's kind of like they're even now. But it really would have changed the game absolutely. You think about that first Patriots Texans game where the Texans got blown out, and the Patriots fumbled the ball inside the 5-yard line in the first series of that game. If they hold on to it, or if the Texans pick it up, that could be a totally different game too. And who knows what happens after that? So. Really, those plays end up being so meaningful, and I think a lot of the time we do forget them, for sure.
Yeah, I think the Packers would have had to play a relatively flawless game to beat San Francisco, because I think San Francisco is really good. But when you look at how that game was breaking for them coming out of the gate, they get the pick 6, they score another TD, now they're getting the ball, they're up 7. Like, everything was in place for a potential upset. I would have been interested to see what would have happened in that game because by the end of the game, San Fran had doubled their yardage. They had like 550 yards or something. So
Kaepernick was unstoppable. But I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Since you brought up the trade value thing, let me ask you right now: Colin Kaepernick versus Robert Griffin
versus Russell Wilson
versus Russell Wilson. Throw all 3 of them in there. Who do you put atop that 3? When you talk about, you want to have a guy for you're building around for the next 10 years. Trade value.
I would take Wilson. I have Wilson ahead of both of those guys.
Really?
I really do. I thought he was incredible this season. I thought he got better as it went along. He's out of all those guys. Well, Griffin's a good leader too, but seems like a really great leader. Had a knack for getting better when it mattered. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal in the second half of that Atlanta game.
Oh,
they scored 4 touchdowns, and especially on the last touchdown drive, that the way he's able to kind of escape pressure, but also he's patient, and he also seems durable. I think Kaepernick has the highest upside though. Like if you were saying to me like, who's a guy who could just revolutionize football, you'd probably pick Kaepernick over Griffin just because there's something that feels more durable about him. Now Griffin's had 2 knee surgeries, right. And I just wonder long term what I'm getting from him, and am I getting 70% of what I saw when he was healthy this year, or is it higher? I don't know. Who would you take out of those three?
Oh, it's a tough question. I would probably go with Wilson too, although, I mean, the scary thing about that second half in Seattle, or in Atlanta, was that not only did Seattle score 28 points, it felt inevitable that they were going to score 28 points.
Yep.
Like, once they scored the first touchdown, it was like, okay, they're coming back. It's going to happen. And the only thing is Atlanta going to score, 3 points to get out of the way and maybe come out with a shallow victory? It honestly felt like it was inevitable from the middle of the third quarter on.
Yeah, I remember 21-0 halftime, thinking, oh, well, they have the ball in the second half, and at some point in this game, they're going to realize that they should be throwing all the time, and they're going to have a chance to come back if their defense can make like 1 or 2 stops. But very rarely are you watching a playoff game where the road team is down 21-0 at halftime, where you're going, this isn't over. They can do something here. I also thought, like, he's in a dome. It's super loud. Marshawn Lynch was really hurt. Like, he wasn't the same. He was, I would say, 60% of what he normally is. His receivers were Sidney Rice. He had Zach Miller playing with a torn, what did he have? A torn whatever? What's it called?
Torn plantar fascia, right?
Right. So he had him hobbled, Sidney Rice, and I get Doug Baldwin. I mean, I can't even remember the receivers they have, and 4 touchdowns. So I have to think I'd have him first. But Kaepernick is just terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
There's
that was probably one of the 2 or 3 best performances of the entire year after a pick six. I mean, he scored pretty much every drive. I think they had 5 80-plus yard drives for touchdowns, a couple more for field goals, and one that one there where they punted after a 40-yard pickup. They just didn't even come close. It was dominance against a pretty good defense.
I thought actually Brady's game was pretty underrated. Within 5 plays, he lost Woodhead and Gronkowski.
Mm-hmm.
They had to totally reinvent whatever offensive game plan they had, and got super creative, and he spread the ball around and just did Tom Brady things. And at this point with the Patriots, I think it's year 12 of the Brady experience. We just take this stuff for granted. There's always going to be a Patriot that gets hurt. They're always going to make it up on the fly, and he's going to do his thing. But I thought that was a really good game because the Texans were getting pressure on him,
mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the third quarter of the game that I started to feel it just didn't seem like Schaub had enough to bring them back. Where would you say? Do you bring Schaub back?
I mean, he just signed a contract extension, I think, before the season, so he's definitely coming back for at least 1 more year.
All right, I'll rephrase. If you're a Texans fan, do you feel good about bringing Schaub back?
I feel like there's not many people out there who they're going to be able to get who's going to be an upgrade on Schaub. I think that he's a limited quarterback. He's not going to be a top 10 guy, or maybe even maybe he can be a bottom of the top 10 guy in a good year. But really, it's not a team that has much at receiver besides Andre Johnson and Owen Daniels, and those are 2 pretty good options to go with, but they really do need a second receiver to go with those guys. Yeah.
That really hurt them. And that's why I was so confident last week in the Pats. They didn't have enough weapons. I'm actually surprised they scored as many points as they did. And it was mainly because Foster was tremendous.
Foster played well, and I think Kubiak actually did a pretty good job of managing the game. He went out and got that extra 3 points before halftime.
Yeah.
That final drive. He challenged the would-be touchdown. That was a touchdown, which I thought was a great challenge usage. He really maximized what they got. And I think the problem with that game was just that the Texans really had nobody who could stop Wes Welker. And the entire Patriots offense sort of emanated from that, from what the Texans tried to do to stop Welker, created holes elsewhere for them. It really is scary to think about it, though, after this year. If the Patriots really don't re-sign Welker, it's going to be a very interesting team. It's really going to be interesting to see how they change without Welker in the lineup next year.
I don't know why they wouldn't. I don't really know what's going on with this. I don't know whether they have medical information on him that makes them skeptical that he should be signing a long-term deal, but I know he's beloved on the team, and I know Brady loves him, and it's just hard for me to figure why they wouldn't commit to him. Belichick will do this sometimes. He just decides certain guys have a price, and he won't go $1 over that price, and I still feel like that's why they didn't win the year they let Deion Branch go, and he just decided Deion Branch isn't worth that price. And all of a sudden you have Rashae Caldwell as the number one receiver in the AFC title game. Let's talk about Sunday's games.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to step on whatever you're writing for us, but what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about these two games coming up? The thing that you're most surprised, the narrative that has taken hold that you're most surprised by?
I think the narrative that Atlanta has no shot at winning, which I feel like very few people give Atlanta a shot at winning this game. And I also I'm not going to quote numbers. I'm not going to go out and give you DVOA. I'm not going to go out and give you a fancy stat. I'm going to say this much. If you're the Atlanta Falcons, you just won a playoff game, so you have that off your back. You pretty much have the entire nation saying, "Oh, you got lucky to win. Seattle pretty much blew you out. You were desperate and barely holding on and got lucky and got 2 plays at the end to win." You're playing at home where I think your record is something like 118-2 over the past 4 or 5 years. You're fantastic at home. Wouldn't you feel like you have nothing to lose? Like, wouldn't you feel like really nobody believes in us and we're playing this juggernaut team that looked absolutely dominant last week and it looks like nobody can stop them? Like, wouldn't you really feel like you just have no pressure on you whatsoever?
There's a couple of things in their favor. One is what you just mentioned. They're classic nobody believes in us candidate. Playoff history says you should always be suspicious about taking a team the week after they just had an incredibly awesome playoff game.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a red flag because it inflates the perception of that team. And as we know, football is a sport where you're up and down depending on the week. Like, think about San Francisco after the New England game.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was going nuts about them. Then they lose to Seattle the next week. Everybody starts going nuts about Seattle. Like, that's football. It's an ebb and flow sport. And it makes me nervous if I'm thinking about taking a team if they just had a monster game the week before. I mean, they might be able to do it again, but the history of teams just laying the smackdown 2 straight weeks in the playoffs, it doesn't really happen that often.
Right, and I think the other thing is that you think about what the 49ers did last week. They didn't run the pistol in Week 16 and Week 17. They saved their pistol. They ran the pistol a little bit in Week 16, but they pretty much saved it for the playoffs. They came out with basically a scheme that the Packers were not expecting whatsoever, that they weren't even looking for on tape.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of when the Jets did that to the Patriots a couple of years ago. I don't mean to bring up a painful memory, but when the Jets came out and they ran zone pretty much the entire game against the Patriots, in a game where the Patriots were not expecting that whatsoever, they changed their scheme somewhat overnight and brought out these aspects of their scheme that the Patriots were not expecting, and they surprised them and won. And the Jets weren't able, it didn't have a long-lasting effect. They weren't that defense for the rest of the playoffs. They were good, but they weren't that good. And so I wonder if the Niners sort of shot their wad prematurely with doing that last week and maybe going out there and giving it all for that Packers game.
If you're a Niner fan, you feel good about how Atlanta's defense looked in the second half of that Seahawks game.
Oh, for
They didn't
sure.
have any pass rush at all.
And John Abraham's clearly not 100%, and who knows if he's even going to be able to play, let alone what level he's going to be able to play at. So that's definitely going to be a contributing factor.
But if you're an Atlanta fan, you also feel really good about the fact that Matt Ryan, in a situation when you're looking at one of the great playoff chokes of all time, you just blew a 27-7 lead in the second half at home in an NFC playoff game. And your QB, now those guys were wide open, but he made 2 huge throws, set up the field goal. Now this is something, what's weird about Matt Ryan is he has a lot of comeback wins. I think he's in the mid-20s. He's way higher than he should be considering he's only been in the league since 2008. And I never know with comeback wins whether it's like chance or like what the breakdown is for, like, do you put a lot of stock in that stat?
I feel like you put some stock into it. I feel like you don't, certain guys, I think even there are certain guys who aren't even that good at quarterback in general who are good at that. Like Mark Sanchez is a good example. But Mark Sanchez obviously is not a fantastic quarterback by any means, but when he was doing the 2-minute drill, when he was having those sort of comeback drives, he was very conservative. He'd check it down to Tomlinson. He'd check it down to Dustin Keller. He would make safe throws. He really wouldn't do a lot of stupid things. And there's definitely a skill to that.
Yeah.
even if it's not necessarily the most valuable thing you can do or a thing that defines you entirely as a quarterback. And I think Matt Ryan is actually pretty good in those situations. I think he's very, he knows when to take risks. He's not overly aggressive when he needs to be. He can be aggressive. When you think about that Panthers game where he hit, I believe it was Julio Jones on the first play for 60 yards and totally changed the perception of what that drive was going to be. It really is one of those things where you sort of you put some stock into it, but you don't put, all your stock into it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's a good sign that he's come through in a lot of those situations.
Mm-hmm.
We also know they can make some big plays. It just seems like inevitable.
The secondary is not great.
Right.
They really build a lot of what they do off their pass rush. But you can throw in Carlos Rogers. You can throw in those safeties with Tony Gonzalez. You can get your receivers downfield for big plays. You just have to hold up in pass protection. So I think that's really the biggest part of that game that people are going to have to realize is whether Atlanta can hold up and give Matt Ryan time to throw in a pocket to throw.
And the running backs looked a lot better last week. I don't know what it was.
I think Seattle's run defense was really beat up after losing Chris Clemens. They had Bruce Irvin in there, who's their rookie defensive end, and he just wasn't. He's not the same guy in rush defense. I really think that was a defense issue as opposed to a offensive issue where the offense suddenly got better running the ball.
You don't think Michael Turner's rejuvenated?
I don't. Sorry.
If I'm a Falcons fan, the part that worries me is somebody who's been starring in the "Thank you for not coaching" section of your Monday column all season, Mike Smith. The Mike Smith-Harbaugh matchup is very worrisome if I'm a Falcons fan.
It really is. And I think last week, the two games I missed on, 2 Saturday games, the one aspect of the game I didn't consider, which I should have considered more, was the coaching mismatches in both matchups. I think John Harbaugh blew out John Fox. I think John Harbaugh coached an incredible game, and John Fox, I have no idea what John Fox was thinking when it comes to some of the decisions he made in that game. And the same thing is true for Harbaugh. Harbaugh versus McCarthy is just, or Jim Harbaugh versus Mike McCarthy is just an obvious mismatch. Harbaugh coached the game like he wanted to win it, and McCarthy coached the game like he wanted to put off losing as long as possible until the very end. And absolutely, Mike Smith has been burned in the past by being aggressive. I think he's learned lessons from that, and I think those lessons aren't necessarily the lessons you want your coach to know in the playoffs. I think you want to play like you're going to win the game as opposed to not losing the game, especially against Harbaugh, who's going to be a hyper-aggressive, brilliant, strategist. So it definitely does bother me. It definitely worries me a lot when it comes to winning one game with everything on the line.
Can I say something about John Fox?
Sure can.
I think there was a big difference between the Matt Ryan situation and Peyton Manning from his own 20 in 9-degree weather when Baltimore had clearly figured out that he wasn't thrown over the top and he was dink and dunking basically. Mm-hmm. And I can see it. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I also thought there was too much vitriol for the decision because I don't know. Think of it. You have 30 seconds. You basically need, I would say, a minimum of 3 passes or a maximum of 3 passes to get into field goal range, right? Mm-hmm. So that's 45 yards.
Right.
And at that point, your kicker has to make a 50-yard field goal in 9-degree weather, which is unlikely. So really, you need about 50 yards, which means Manning would have had to complete at least one pass that somebody broke or 3 straight 15-yard passes. I just don't think it was realistic. I think I would have tried one, but I wouldn't have kneeled on first down. But I didn't hate it because especially the way the overtime rules are, where both sides get the ball unless there's a touchdown.
Okay, well let me say this. There's 2 different decisions in play here. If you're saying that this was the case before overtime, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think Fox's argument that they were just emotionally distraught after the last play and they wanted to kind of just get to overtime and deal with it then, I can understand that. But they did the same thing at the end of the first half in almost the exact same situation. So that Fox's explanation doesn't really carry weight with me. I can hear some of what you're saying, and I will say this much. Matt Prater, their field goal kicker, has a pretty decent leg. And they're playing in Denver, so it is cold, but there's the thin air of Denver, which adds a few yards to every field goal attempt.
True.
So your range is going to be bigger in Denver than anywhere else, even in cold weather. And I don't think there's much downside to it. I mean, are you really worried that Peyton Manning's going to throw an interception?
No, I would have, as I said, I would have thrown on first down and seen what happened.
Mm-hmm. I mean, why don't you? I think just give it a shot. In the worst case, if it doesn't work out, then you kneel 2 times to go to overtime.
I'm just saying I can see it. We also don't know if Manning was hurt. We don't know because I thought his play declined as the game went along. We don't know if he was banged up, if he was saying things on the sidelines like, I can't feel my hand. I just don't know. We don't have all the information. The one thing I didn't like about it, and this is something that still bothers me about Super Bowl 42, I think sometimes you can just be too conservative, and it's almost like you just don't have balls. And I think with football, in football especially, that aggression can kind of really help. You look at the Giants in Super Bowl 42, they were just coming at the Patriots. They were going to take chances. They were going to do whatever it took to win. I think the same thing with the Patriots in 2001 and even in 03 and 04. You always had this sense they were going to do whatever it took to win. They'll take chances. They'll go for it on fourth down. It was just a certain level of aggression that the whole team had, and they played that way. And I think when you get passive like that and you make a statement we don't think we can get that first down, this is why it drives you and I crazy when teams don't go for it on 4th and 1 on the 2-yard line. So you're making an announcement, I don't trust my team. Mm-hmm. And that's the part I didn't like about it. Does it make sense?
I feel like it's so much easier to consider the downside than it is to consider the upside in those situations. It doesn't bother me in a vacuum because you can say the weather was bad. You can say that the chances were slim, and they were slim. It wasn't a sure thing by any means that they would go down and score. But it just seems like the downside is non-existent, and the upside is enormous. And the emotional impact does mean something. I don't think the Broncos lost because they didn't go for it in that situation or they weren't aggressive. But it certainly wouldn't have hurt the team. I really feel like if Manning throws 2 incompletions, the team's not going to say, "Oh, well, we have no shot. We're going to give up in overtime." So it just seems like when you have Peyton Manning, you really have to factor your team and what you do well. And I think the Broncos have a great passing offense. So when I was upset with Cam Newton not going forward on 4th down against the Falcons earlier this year, part of it was not only because the match said it was a bad situation, but also because they had Cam Newton and $55 million of guaranteed money in running backs in their backfield. So if you're going to build your team around a guy and then you're not going to use him in a situation where you can win the game or have a shot at winning the game, that really frustrates me. And I think that's really sort of something that coaches need to consider.
Well, it's also a small piece of a larger puzzle, which is if you play scared in one part, then that kind of drifts over to the rest of the part. Carolina, they didn't go for it on 4th down from midfield, and then the next play they get beat deep. To me, it just seems like all part of a larger picture, which is you're either out there thinking we could beat these guys, we have confidence in ourselves, whatever. It's I think we can beat these guys, but I'm not sure. And if we're in this situation, maybe you know what I mean? Once you put that hesitation, it changes everything. We probably don't have enough time to argue about Peyton Manning. We're going to have to do this on a future podcast. But you were saying, it's funny, this is one of the few things you and I really differ on. Mm-hmm. You don't think that we can take something like Peyton Manning's playoff record. Mm-hmm. You don't think it means anything.
I think it means very little.
I think it means something. And I think, and this is what we had Patricia on Grantland today. She's broke down basically every playoff game Peyton Manning ever played, what the situation was, what the spread was, and what happened. And I think if you're talking about this guy as the greatest quarterback of all time or one of the top 3 or 4 greatest of all time, the bottom line is he's lost a lot of bad playoff games. And yet, no, you can't blame the quarterback for losing a game, but he's a big piece of it. And they've been a big favorite in 5 or 6 of these playoff games. And this last one was the latest with the Colts. They're 9.5-point favorites. They lose at home. This is something that's happened to him 4 or 5 times over his career. And at some point, that's got to mean something. So you just disagree.
But here's my counterpoint. We'll go with Matt Ryan for now, but we'll go to Peyton Manning too. Matt Ryan Is everything Matt Ryan did in that game on Sunday good because the Falcons won, and is everything Matt Ryan did in that game bad if Matt Bryant misses that field goal?
Yeah, the truth lies in between whatever happened. I understand your point that the last 30 seconds shouldn't have impacted how you felt about Matt Ryan's overall performance in that game. But if you look at Manning, like he comes up short really badly in those two Patriot playoff games in 03 and 04, right?
He does, but then what about the game in 06 where he drives the Colts back and comes up with a 2-minute field drive to beat the Patriots?
That was his best playoff game. I agree. But then January 06, the year before, they're favored by 8.5 at home against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh wins. They are favored, going through this here, sorry. They are favored by 11 at home, January 2008 against the Chargers. They lose. And not only they lose, but Billy Volek was involved at the end of that game. Remember that?
That was the Philip Rivers torn ACL game, right?
Yes. They're favored by 4.5 in the Super Bowl. Not a ton against the Saints, but they lost that one. Mm-hmm. And last year, I put it this way. I don't think he's as good in the playoffs as he's been in the regular season, and the stats back that up. I think he is a much better regular season quarterback. In the playoffs, for whatever reason, he hasn't played at that level.
Well, I think every quarterback is worse in the playoffs than they are in the regular season.
But he's much worse, though.
Is he really much worse?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's 20 playoff games, I think 32 TDs, 20 interceptions. And this is somebody that, over the course of his career, he's got 430 TDs and 210 interceptions, something like that. It's more than a 2-to-1 ratio. But that's dropped in the playoffs.
I feel like we're talking about what amounts to almost, a season and a half now?
20 games, yeah.
Manning playoff games, yeah. So we're talking about, would it really be that impossible for a guy of Peyton Manning's caliber to have a 16-game stretch against really tough competition where he threw 20 interceptions in a season where we would say, okay, it was just above average season as opposed to a fantastic season? What I'm saying is part of it can be just chance, but I think his performance is better than his win-loss record. If you want to say that Tom Brady performed better than Peyton Manning in the playoffs, I will agree with you. If you want to say that Tom Brady has been significantly better to the extent that their records indicate, I don't agree at all.
Well, here's the win record thing. Here's where it helps you. He has had bad luck because you go through Mike Vanderjagt missed a couple big ones. Easily that, I think, what is he, 9-11? Easily could have been 12-8 with a couple different breaks, but
I think even better than that.
My point is this. I do think it's part of the discussion when we talk about him, when we remember whatever his career is. And now in this case, the Broncos game, I thought was the most unfair playoff loss that he's had because everybody was talking about that pass afterwards. And the bottom line is they should have won the game. He did his job. It was 28-28. He drove them down the field. They scored the go-ahead touchdown. And his defense should have stopped. It's incredible that they didn't have a safety far enough back or that he missed the angle or whatever happened. Mm-hmm. But he did his job, and that was one of the flukiest touchdowns probably in the history of football. It's in the top 12, mm-hmm. right? It was one of the biggest choke jobs we've ever seen in a football game.
Right.
And I can't blame him for that. But at the same time, maybe it's almost like something about him in the playoffs where just weird stuff happens. And it's happened again and again and again. And even that Patriot game you mentioned, that was a weird game. He's involved in a lot of weird playoff games. And maybe that would be part of his legacy.
I agree with you there. And I think part of it is, and this extends to basketball as well. The example I always give is Jordan and LeBron when it comes to Peyton Manning. But we end up really defining a lot of what we know about players and their playoff abilities from what happens at the beginning of their career. With Jordan, for example, Jordan had the perfect linear narrative where he lost, I believe, his first 3 playoff series in the first round.
Yep.
Then he made it to the next round and lost the series. He made it to the next round and lost the series. Then I think he made it to the finals and lost. But then when he started winning, he kept winning, and he pretty much never lost a playoff series again, it felt like. Whereas he was so good once he started winning championships that we forgot about the beginning of his career and how he didn't have that reputation. And with Manning, he's won a Super Bowl, but he hasn't won repeatedly, and so he still has that kind of rep. And you compare him with someone like Brady. If you flip Brady's playoff career and chronologically, he would have the same reputation that Manning has for losing until he wins that Super Bowl against the Eagles. Because he had a lot of games. He's had a lot of games recently where he either turned the ball over 3 or 4 times, like he did against the Ravens, or came up short with a fantastic team in the Super Bowl, as he did twice against the Giants. He would have that reputation if we just flipped his career. And I don't think that winning a championship at the beginning of your career is more meaningful than winning a championship at the end of your career, but I think our perception of how we view quarterbacks and how we view star athletes and how they do in the playoffs really becomes meaningful because of what they do in those first few games.
Brady's had a couple shaky playoff games in the last few years. One definitely was the at Denver game. I think he had 4 picks. Although, if I remember, at least one of them wasn't his fault, but whatever.
Hey, one of the interceptions, the pick 6, wasn't Manning's fault.
True.
Probably pass interference and a tip ball off Eric Decker's chest.
Super Bowl 42, not one of Brady's best games by any stretch. He got pounded the whole game.
Mm-hmm.
But he did lead them on the game-winning drive that if the Tyree catch doesn't happen, we talk about, Brady did it again, which goes to your point of sometimes this stuff's out of control. The Jets game, he was terrible that he had in the playoffs when the Jets upset them. The Ravens game was terrible.
Even he had a home game against the Chargers where he threw 3 picks, but it was the game where Phillip Rivers played through the torn ACL, so
yep.
The other quarterback was even worse from what I remember.
Last year, Super Bowl, up and down. And he missed, I still blame him for the Welker pass that would have probably clinched the game, but I thought it was more on him than Welker. But at what point he got hot? Remember he made like 16 straight completions or something?
Oh, he was incredible in the second quarter, but if I brought up Peyton Manning and I said, Peyton Manning was incredible in the second quarter of this playoff game,
yes,
you'd have a way to say, okay, well, what did he do in the fourth quarter? And that is meaningful to some extent. It does matter. But it's just interesting how we view those guys differently because of what they did 10 years ago. Yeah,
I think the Tracy Porter throw in the Super Bowl for Manning, that was one. Now Manning comes down and they tie that game and then they win in overtime. We're not talking about this.
True.
It's over. He's won his second Super Bowl, the whole thing. I think it's a little unfair that people are going to remember the overtime throw, only because I thought his comeback was great this year, and I'm amazed he came back. I thought he played at a much higher level than I ever expected, and he did his job in that game. I think he would have lost, and I think the Patriots would have beaten Denver the next week. We'll never know. But I like talking about this stuff. So I see your point that it's too tough to talk about playoff record when there's so many variables for this stuff. But at the same time, I do think it's a worthy discussion. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say like, Peyton Manning's the biggest choke artist ever, but I don't think he's been that great in the playoffs. And I think there's not a lot of great Peyton Manning playoff moments that we can point to.
Well, I think we need to go game by game at some point.
So we'll do that again on another podcast. Maybe we just go through. But yeah, and maybe some of that's bad luck. Maybe it's like one play, whatever. But I can just tell you this: I was there for him. I was there for Montana. I was there for Marino and Elway and all these guys. And I don't. If I had one game with my life depending on it, I don't know if he would be one of my top 4 picks if it was a playoff game. Just from the history of what I watched.
Mm-hmm. I might not disagree with you, but I don't know that I'm right to think that.
We'll have to delve into this more. So when is your column going up? Friday?
Got
or are you doing double of them?
Yeah, AFC preview is going up tomorrow. NFC preview is going up on Friday. I actually don't have anything going up on Grantland today, which might be the first day in months, but that's the case.
That's good. Yeah, you've been a machine. You and Russell Westbrook, you never miss a day. Russell Westbrook hasn't missed a game, high school, college, or pros. How about that?
I don't know if I want to be compared to Russell Westbrook. I think there's going to be trade rumors propping up around me pretty soon. It's not a good sign.
You, Russell, two of the great warriors.
You're going to plug me into the Grantland trade machine and try and get Josh Smith somehow.
No, you're untradeable. I turned down all Bill Barnwell offers from the other websites. As always, a pleasure. We will look forward to your stuff on Thursday and Friday. We will continue this Manning argument on another Smart Guy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. As always, we'll talk to you soon.
See you, Bill.
All right, coming up on the BS Report, Aaron Schatz from FootballOutsiders.com right after this.
At Subway, wake up with breakfast made the way you say, like your very own sizzling steak, egg, white, and cheese on an English muffin. Amazingly under 200 calories. Want green peppers, red onions? Done and done. You so got it made. Subway, build your better breakfast.
All right, as promised from FootballOutsiders.com, Aaron Schatz. Last week, a lot of weird stuff happened.
Definitely a lot of weird stuff.
What did
that's the thing about prognostication. You can only try to predict the future based on what you know. It's all about probabilities. Nothing is assured. And even the best special teams in the league can fall flat on their face not once but twice.
Unbelievable. We were on this podcast a week ago praising Baltimore special teams and what a possible advantage that might be for them.
And you have
almost cost them the season.
They didn't allow a single touchdown return the whole season, and then they allowed 2 in one game. And they only had like 4 returns against them that were even over 40 yards all season. I mean, it was pretty remarkable. And the Patriots, the same thing. Patriots had excellent special teams. Houston was the worst in the league. Suddenly, Houston's got a big run back. Although Daniel Manning didn't return stuff during the season, so it makes a little bit sense that he was a little better than whoever they had before. And Shane Graham, who can't hit a long field goal to save his life, hits 55 at the end of the first half.
I know. It's crazy. It's crazy that they were even in that game.
Yeah, it really is. What's amazing is that by our numbers, we have that game as one of the top 10 offensive games of the last 20 years for the Patriots.
Really?
Yeah, it sounds a little nutty. Part of it is the opponent adjustment because Houston was our number 3 defense for the season, and they were particularly strong. More against whatever downs and distances that the Patriots had the ball on. The other is just that the Patriots were really efficient. Very few losses of yardage, no turnovers, just constant, consistent gains over and over and over.
Mm. So when we look at that Denver-Baltimore game, have you guys ever done a study on freezing cold playoff games and if there's anything we can glean from them? Because it really does seem like all bets are off once the temperature goes beyond a certain level.
I don't know about all bets are off. I looked at it at one point and found that, yes, it's true that dome teams and warm teams do struggle a little bit more in cold weather in November and December. But that was 6 or 7 years ago. And actually that effect seems to have kind of, at least for the last few years, hasn't really been there. There have been warm teams that have done well in cold weather, even in December and into the playoffs. So I don't really think that what happened with all bets are off had anything to do with the weather, to be perfectly honest, unless specifically the weather prevented Peyton Manning from throwing deep. But I think that the weather had nothing to do with the special teams touchdowns. The weather had nothing to do with Raheem Moore blowing coverage. The weather had nothing to do with Eric Decker letting a pass go off his hands and into the hands of a Ravens player, and it had nothing to do with Peyton Manning making a dumb decision in overtime. I just think these things all just kind of happened.
Well, maybe Raheem Moore made that mistake because he was cold.
And Champ Bailey also. I mean, that's the other thing. You project games based on what you know of the players. And Champ Bailey had a bit of a rebound season, and their secondary had been very good all year. And Champ Bailey was terrible. I understand the idea that you don't let a guy that age try to cover the deep guy with speed, but the second touchdown by Torrey Smith, that was more of a technique thing where he just got beat.
Well, don't worry. Jim Caldwell never threw to Torrey Smith again.
That was a little weird, yeah.
Don't worry. He was going to hand off on first down.
They won anyway.
I know. They won despite the offensive coordinator. That what the Niners did to the Packers, especially coming off a pick six first, that had to rank right up there with offensive performances, no?
Yeah, that was pretty good. But there were a couple of things. There were a couple of fumbles in there, and that's why it didn't rank quite as highly. But the Green Bay looked like they'd never seen a read option before, like they haven't watched college football for the last 15 years.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Dom Capers did not throw his hat into a head coaching ring job.
No. And the other thing also is I do think you have to look a little bit at the personnel. I don't know if Nick Perry is known as a run stopper, but Eric Walden certainly isn't one. So with Perry injured and Walden stuck starting, I mean, didn't it seem like every time Kaepernick broke a big one, the cameras showed Eric Walden looking confused or angry and confused?
Wasn't good. That Atlanta-San Francisco line is pretty wacky. I think it's at 4 right now.
San Francisco is favored by, you mean?
San Francisco is favored by 4. See, and we see this happen sometimes in the playoffs where one team looks so good and then the other team looks so shaky that people overreact. Like, to me, this should be San Francisco by 3, and yet it will probably end up at 4 on Sunday. What do your numbers say about this?
Yeah, I mean,
matchup?
I'd probably make it 3. San Francisco is the better team by our numbers. I've been going on and on about Atlanta all year. Believe me, I got lots of very angry tweets about it this weekend. But the fact is that one last-minute win against a very, very good Seattle team at home, against a Seattle team that was playing at 10 in the morning on their personal body clock, does not erase all those 7-point wins from earlier in the year over teams like Arizona and Carolina and so forth, and Oakland. All those close wins they had over bad opponents. They're just not a very good team. They're a good team, but not a very good team. It's also, there are some particularly bad matchups here for them. For example, the weakness of the Seattle pass defense is covering tight ends. That's the way it was during the season, and that was very clearly the way it was in that game. The weakness of the San Francisco pass defense is covering slot receivers, because Carlos Rogers is not as good a nickel corner as he is an outside corner, and I'm not quite sure why they use him that way. But Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman are excellent linebackers in coverage, and they generally cover the tight end. Well, who would you rather have as the guy you're hoping will kill the other team, Tony Gonzalez or Harry Douglas? I mean, if you're asking about after-game quotes, I'll pick Harry Douglas. But if you're asking about in-game performance, I'd rather have the weakness be the one we get to attack with Tony Gonzalez.
That's trouble for Atlanta.
The other thing is, I realize that Atlanta ran the ball sweet in that game, but it is a massive exception to the way things were during the year. You could either believe that they suddenly figured out whatever was wrong with their run blocking, or that it was a bit of an aberration. But Atlanta was 29th in our ratings for running against a San Francisco team that was second in run defense. Atlanta was 28th in the red zone running the ball. They were 27th on first down. They were 26th on third down. They were dead last in short yardage situations. I mean, the running the ball thing is very unlikely to happen again.
Your old friend Bill Barnwell mentioned that he thought part of that was Seattle's no Chris Clemens and just Seattle's run defense. I think that's very likely part of it. Listen, the reason why most people did not expect Bruce Irvin to go in the first round is that he is a very pure pass rush specialist. Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with having a guy like that until you have to start him.
Yes, and then they run to his side all the time.
Right.
And he ends up on his back a lot. The one thing I will say about it, I thought both Turner and Rogers both looked like they had a little something. It went beyond just, they're holes or whatever. Like, Turner just looked the best he's looked in a few weeks to me. Like, he actually had some burst and some power and was knocking guys over. He looked like the old Michael Turner.
Right. The thing is, I tend to believe that when that happens in 4 or 5 games, it's a trend. If it happens in one game, it's a fluke. It's likely they just kind of woke up on the right side of the bed that morning. And it's probably not going to happen again this week. It might, but it probably won't.
Well, I just looked up the line. At least on sportsbook.com, it's 4.5. I don't think there's ever been a title favorite in a championship game that was over 4.
Right. The flip
on the road.
The flip of this is the fact that Atlanta is still home. Home still matters. The NFC West teams still struggle on the road more than any other teams in the league. San Francisco doesn't have a record of struggling on the road that quite matches Seattle's. But, they are an NFC West team, and those teams tend to struggle on the road more than you would expect. And that's why I think that this game is a little closer than it would be if it was neutral field.
And we also, we just saw, let's see, it was week 16, I think, so that was 4 weeks ago. we saw the Niners really struggle in that kind of environment in Seattle. And granted, that's outdoors versus indoors, but same kind of really loud crowd, hard to hear, get a little rattled. So if I'm an Atlanta fan, I'm looking at that game and taking a little solace in that. But the fear I would have if I was an Atlanta fan was just how easy. I feel like Seattle would have scored 50 points if they just had Russell Wilson throw that whole game. They couldn't stop him. They couldn't rush him.
Any of the read option. Cam Newton really killed Atlanta with that stuff during the regular season.
Yep. So
at least they'll know to prepare for it, unlike Green Bay. But
we have
necessarily mean they're going to be that good against it.
Yeah, we have two really good examples of quarterbacks who play a similar style to Kaepernick, torching that Atlanta defense. Cam Newton and Russell Wilson. So that's not a good sign for them. But you know they'll make a big play. They have the nobody believes in us factor. I hate it because I think the Niners are better. But if that line stays at 4.5, I really have to strongly consider taking the points.
Yeah, I think the logical line would be 3. I think the logical line would be San Francisco by 3. I'm not counting out Atlanta by any.
I think it should be 3 too. They're basically it's a 1.5 tax because they know nobody wants to take Atlanta, and that's it.
And some of that is recency bias.
Yes,
the fact that a week ago we saw Atlanta blow a big lead, and we saw San Francisco set records.
Right.
And you don't remember the botched snaps from that game. What you remember is Kaepernick running for almost 200 yards. So your mind is like San Francisco, San Francisco, San Francisco. But
Barnwell and I,
there have been plenty of times in the playoffs where teams had a huge game and then come in the next week and lost.
We were just talking about if Green Bay doesn't fumble that kick up 14-7 on their own 10, and at that point it really seemed like Rodgers was just going to go down and score again and score every time he got the ball. Maybe that whole game's different. So I don't.
Yeah, there's always a lot of points like that.
Well, but I'm saying I know it ended up with San Francisco dominating that game, but I do wonder what would have happened had that play not happened.
The trick is the question of whether San Francisco is built to come back from deficits, because there was a bit of a feeling, I think, against Seattle, that the reason why that game was so one-sided in favor of Seattle is that with all the zone ready stuff, San Francisco is not a team that is built to come back from deficits. So much is based on the run for them. So then that asks the question, well, if Green Bay had gone up 14-7, 21-7, do you have a different game at that point? They can't use the read option as much, etc. But I still think San Francisco, Green Bay was so ill-prepared on defense that San Francisco would have won.
It would have had to be a shootout for them. It would have had to be a 45-42 type game. On paper, New England, San Francisco looks like a delicious Super Bowl.
It's
a lot of good storylines.
And it is the best bet among the 4 possible matchups. We have it as 36% possibility or something.
Yep.
You have to remember that in our ratings for the season, the Patriots were 25 percentage points or something ahead of Baltimore, and San Francisco was roughly the same amount ahead of Atlanta. So those are pretty big gaps. The difference being that not only were the Patriots a little higher than San Francisco, but that they get to be at home, whereas San Francisco has to go on the road.
What are you seeing about I know the Pats and the Ravens have already played. I know the Ravens defy numbers at this point, but do you see any gigantic advantages for the Patriots in this game?
I don't think they defy numbers much at all.
You don't think the Ravens do?
That they won a very, very close game. So they're a good team that won a close game. Good teams win close games occasionally. It's not like they went in and blew out Denver, and that would have been a defying numbers kind of game. This wasn't a defying numbers kind of game. This was a, hey, things kind of went right for us in a lot of places, and we're a good team kind of game, But last week you told us the numbers said Denver was going to – the numbers indicated that Denver should win convincingly. Right, but you know the way it is. There's always possibilities of different things. And when Denver's best cornerback suddenly stops playing well –
right.
Here's the thing about Baltimore. Their offense is so built around the deep ball. Deep ball offenses are inherently inconsistent. Baltimore's especially so. They were 30th this year in offensive consistency as far as our numbers week-to-week rating for their offense. So that is a good thing. When you're the inferior team in a matchup, you want to be inconsistent because it means a larger chance that you'll come in and have a really good game, an unexpectedly good game.
A lightning in a bottle game.
Yeah, and there is obviously a little bit of a feeling that that's a weakness for the Patriots, covering the deep pass. However, two things I will say about that. The first is, if the deep ball is not hitting off a cylinder, if Flacco launches it and it doesn't drop directly into the hands of his receiver, if Jacoby Jones drops one, as Jacoby Jones is often wont to do, this thing is very likely a blowout. The other thing is that the Patriots have improved significantly against deep passes since Talib and moving McCourty to safety. In particular, they've improved against the middle deep passes, and the fact is the Ravens like to usually go right side of the field. That's where Flacco throws better. That's where Torrey Smith often is. But the Patriots in their first 10 games allowed 15.5 average yards on passes that went 20 or more yards through the air.
Oh, God.
Since week 11, they've allowed only 10.3 average yards. The completion percentage on those passes has gone from 46% to 32%. And the DVOA has gone from 45% worse than average to 3% better than average.
Now,
so
part of that could be the competition.
May not be as much of a weakness as we think it is.
Part of that could be the competition they played, though, right?
No, the DVOA is adjusted for that.
Oh, look at you! You're adjusting your DVOA.
Well, it's always a problem.
No, I know. I'm kidding. Right? Okay, so you're saying Aqib Talib, and maybe Denard, but just in general, the secondary of the Patriots looking a little bit better now.
Because that Talib doesn't have great charting numbers by our game charting. As far as I know, Denard's played better than him, actually. But the thing about Talib is, I think you saw it with Andre Johnson. He could not stop them from throwing to Andre Johnson.
Yeah.
But Andre Johnson didn't get past him.
Yep.
Either.
Well, Torrey Smith is a big concern because he torched them in the previous game they played this year.
Obviously, he is the biggest concern.
That's the guy I'm worried about.
There's no doubt about it, especially because, the Patriots' run defense has been so strong this year. I don't see Ray Rice as being a huge issue, except for on passes. Because you saw with Houston, I don't know if they'll play defense against Baltimore the same way they did against Houston, but those swing passes to the outside were wide open the entire game, both games against the Texans. I kept waiting for them to throw one to Arian Foster where no one was in front of him and he went for 25 yards. Eventually they did throw one, but if they let Ray Rice do that, that's a problem.
I'm happy Jim Caldwell is going to be prominently involved in this game as a Pats fan.
Aren't you now?
Yeah, that'll be great. Last thing, this Pats offense. There's a myth that the 2007 Pats was the greatest offense of the Brady era, which it was true for the first 10 weeks or so, and then it wasn't. And once Sammy Morris got hurt, they just couldn't run the ball the same way, and eventually they wore down for whatever reason.
It just wasn't going to last.
Wasn't going to last.
It was so amazing.
Didn't remain as potent. Where does this particular offense, even without Gronkowski, their ability to run the ball is so different than any other Patriot team since the one good Corey Dillon season. How does that affect where this Patriots offense ranks against the other ones?
Yeah, running the ball is good. Balance is good. Running the ball helps you not blow leads late in particular, but it still is generally better to pass than to run. By our numbers, the best offense of the last 22 years belonged to the Patriots in 2007, slightly ahead of the 2010 Patriots. This team comes in, I think, 14th. So this comes in as the fourth best offense of the Brady era. We have 2011 also higher than this one, slightly. But then again, that one got Gronk for the whole season, and Hernandez for half of it. And this one's had, very few games with both those guys on the field at the same time. The thing is, the defense is better. Okay, here's an amazing stat. By our ratings, guess which defense was better, New England or Baltimore, during the regular season?
Baltimore was middle of the pack. I'm going to say the Pats.
Yep. Not by much, not by enough to make it mean anything. But the Pats were 15th, and Baltimore was 19th. And Baltimore had its best defensive game of the year last week, by our numbers. Now, is that the sign of a trend, or is that likely to happen again this week? The first is possible. The second is more likely, that it's more of a fluke, that they're not going to play quite that well on defense this week. And against the Patriots, that's not a good thing.
I do think the thing that worries me about Baltimore is they do seem like they have a little bit of the whole veteran team that saved a different gear for the playoffs.
Yes. Yeah. And listen, we know, I don't have a number to figure out why it is this way, but I think both you and I and everybody else has the feeling that Baltimore just doesn't match up well for the Patriots. This just is not a good matchup for the Patriots. Even though the Patriots have been better than Baltimore the last couple of years, the games they've played with Baltimore have been very, very close, whether they win them or not. That's why I think the line is a little ludicrous.
Yeah,
it would be really hard for me to take more than a touchdown for the Patriots on this game, given the kind of close games they've had with Baltimore in the last couple of years.
The familiarity thing is a huge thing, and this is why the Niners didn't want to play Seattle in the title game. Because the more you play somebody, the more you know what they like to do and what they're bad at, and
right. And
you just get super comfortable.
It's more that the Patriots know what the Ravens want to do, but I have a high amount of confidence about the Patriots winning this game, but I do not have a very high amount of confidence about the Patriots winning this game with a huge margin. I think what's more likely is that the Ravens will hit a couple of those deep balls, and that the Patriots will win by 7, maybe 10.
I think it's going to be tight.
And again, if the deep ball really works, and the Patriots have a couple of surprise things like the way that they fumbled twice in the first half of the San Francisco game, again, Baltimore can win. Prognostication doesn't mean absolutes. I'm not saying the Patriots are a guaranteed winner, but there's a very strong possibility of it. I think it's about 70% likelihood that the Patriots win. Maybe that doesn't sound as strong as it could be, but in the NFL where there are so many upsets, that's a pretty strong percentage for a playoff game. When you're not playing Jacksonville.
The best thing they have in their favor is the game that Baltimore played in Denver last week. It was a brutal game. And they were on the floor. They were out there for a 6th period in 9-degree weather.
Well, 5 periods. The 6th period was like 2 plays.
5 and a 10th.
Danny Tessito went and looked for me to look at teams that play an overtime game and on the road and then play a second game on the road the following week. And there doesn't seem to be any indication in our ratings that it matters. But then we flipped that around and we looked at teams that play at home for the second straight week against an opponent that just came off an overtime game on the road. And those teams do tend to play about 5 or 6 percentage points of DVOA better than you would expect. That's not much. And I realize that when I say percentage points of my stat, it's not really something that most people in their heads go, oh, that means this. I know it's a little, it's not very tangible, but it showed there was a tiny, definite little bit of an advantage for the Patriots to be at home 2 weeks in a row with a team coming off the road in the OT.
And then you throw in the cold weather. You throw in the fact the Ravens are a little older. Well, the cold weather
doesn't matter. The Ravens no cold weather.
Well, I still think it's a little debilitating to be out there that game was 5 hours. They're out there for 5 hours. Supposedly their heaters broke too in like the fourth quarter.
It's just tiring if it was 40 degrees and the flights and the being short on air and the mile high and
that couldn't help either.
No, that probably
just helped my cause. That's my best hope for the Pats is that it's just a beaten up Ravens team that has now played for 18 straight weeks and just came off a marathon game that just would never end.
The fact is, this worked out really, really well for them.
It really did.
Okay, avoiding Denver and not having to go to Denver and playing a Baltimore team that, yes, they beat Denver, but in general for the season that was the weaker team, and you get them at home, really works out well for the Patriots.
And yet that didn't stop my dad and I from having a conversation about which team we would have rather played. And my dad, I think, is leaning toward I would have rather have gone to Denver than face this Ravens team, which scares the hell out of me.
People will only say that because nothing against your dad, because of the fact that we're not.
You think he would have chosen whatever?
Going to Denver, everybody would be saying, "God, I wish we were just staying home." And
my dad's terrified.
Peyton Manning.
My dad's terrified of the Ravens, and has been for years. He just feels like they play us well.
The other thing that works out well for the Patriots is that if Atlanta does win, they look like an easier team for the Patriots to face, certainly, than San Francisco. And there is a reasonable chance of Atlanta winning, and that would work out well for them also. You know, in Atlanta, a Patriots-Atlanta Super Bowl or a San Francisco-Baltimore Super Bowl would have a much bigger line than a San Francisco-New England Super Bowl would have.
Yeah, I don't even think we can guess that line yet because I think a lot of it would depend on what happened this week.
How they play this week.
I would say right now, you'd probably favor the Niners.
No, my guess is that the gamblers understand. The gamblers have been so on Patriots this year. I would guess the Patriots would be favored by like 1.
When was
but
the last time
Atlanta,
we had
it would be like 7.
Can't remember the last time we had a
San Francisco against Baltimore would be like 7.
Super Bowl spread of 1. I can't remember the last time that happened.
What was it when Green Bay played Pittsburgh?
Denver, Green Bay, 98?
What was Green Bay, Pittsburgh?
No, it was higher than that. Somebody was favored by like 3, I think. This is great. I can't wait to see what happens this weekend. Hard to believe the Pats, you know, it's year 12. They're still cranking out these AFC Championship games. It's really amazing.
Really remarkable run. And, you know, I said in an interview a couple weeks ago that there's nothing I can do about the fact that I'm a Patriots fan and that my team has won 10 games every year since I started this website.
Yeah.
When we started it, I was going to be honest about we were all going to be honest about who we rooted for. And I'm the Patriots fan. Everyone else on staff roots for somebody else. And when we started the site in 2003, I didn't think they'd still be winning AFC championships 10 years later. In fact, I didn't think they'd win an AFC championship in 2003. So this is, you know, eventually they are going to be terrible. It will happen. But I love the ride. I mean, not to rub it into all the people whose teams don't have this kind of success, but people from San Francisco who were around 15, 20 years ago understand how we feel. It's a great ride. People from Pittsburgh who are in their 50s understand how this feels, you know?
Yeah, I think the craziest thing about it has just been the team's ability to withstand any sort of adversity. Like Gronk goes out in the 5th play as the second best offensive player in the team. And it's like, all right, well, we're going to move this guy here.
And the constant changes.
Yeah, it's just
they
can
said,
weather anything.
Look, are they better without Gronk? No. But the Packers, right, lost your Michael Finley for half the year, won the Super Bowl, and he was one of their top weapons.
True.
Teams lose guys, have injuries, and win the whole thing. It does happen. You can withstand injuries, except really to your quarterback.
Quarterback's the only one.
And the funny thing is, for all that Kaepernick's been amazing, let's be honest, of the 4 teams left, which team could take an injury to its quarterback the most?
Oh, yeah.
No one wants to see Tyrod Taylor or Ryan Mallett out there.
I was thinking that actually during last week's game. Brady went on a scramble and 2 guys hit him from different ways. And there was a split second where it's like, oh my God, he's dead. And then he just got up. But then I was thinking like, God, if he got hurt, Ryan Mallett would come in. That would be horrible.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Mallett still has tons of promise, and he's a pretty good guy to have your backup. You want to have like a nice, talented youngster like that you want to teach, but you wouldn't want you wouldn't want him to have to see the field all of a sudden without preparation in a playoff game. Alex Smith could hack it, though. If Alex Smith had to come in the middle of the game, like Bledsoe in the AFC Championship game in 2001, that would be an awesome story, by the way, wouldn't it?
I remember I made that joke in a column like 2.5 months ago. Like, if this is Brady the sequel, then that has to happen in this game. Alex Smith has to play.
Doesn't Kaepernick have to get hit on a read option, and Alex Smith has to come in and win the game for them?
Yeah, I had been planning on making that one of my predictions. I don't know if he'll win the game, but I think we see Alex Smith in this game somehow. Kaepernick has to get dinged up at some point. Alex Smith has to put the helmet on.
Even if it's just for a couple of plays, it's too Brady Bledsoe to not happen.
Has to happen. And the Brady Bledsoe parallels to this from the get-go. That's what worries me about the Niners Super Bowl chances. It really does feel like the sequel.
The one thing that is different, admittedly, is that nobody has ever quite thought of Alex Smith as a franchise quarterback. And Kaepernick, everybody's known his talent. He was a high second round pick.
Yeah, but you remember Bledsoe at the time. Like the real Pats fans were really, really down on Bledsoe.
Oh, I remember.
When he got hurt.
People who follow me on Twitter know that you can count on me roughly once a month for a Michael Bishop joke.
People. The seeds of doubt for Bledsoe
was going to be Colin Kaepernick. They thought the Patriots were going to start running the option and we'd get rid of Bledsoe and Michael Bishop was going to be the man.
We'd all come to kind of the resigned realization that Bledsoe was never going to be the guy we totally thought he was going to be. Well, he wasn't a bad quarterback, but he wasn't.
He was like Romo.
Yeah, he wasn't. We thought he was going to be a potential Montana or Elway or the Larry Bird of football for us, and by about 2000, we realized that wasn't happening. So, and I think that's probably where the Niners fans were with Alex Smith. Yeah, he's solid, but it's not happening. And then all of a sudden, this other guy magically appears out of thin air. But anyway, Aaron Schatz, when are you writing your preview? Friday?
Yeah, our previews will be up on Outsiders Friday. I'll have a Ravens Patriots thing of some sort on ESPN Insider Thursday, and then Friday the film previews by Andy Benoit go up Thursday. And if people haven't checked out Football Outsiders, the film stuff this year, Andy is just doing a great job, and we have these great graphics that he uses to break down sort of how routes work and how stunts work, and it really gives you good insight. And then we usually try to tie in some of what he's written about to the stat stuff that we do. So the stat previews will go up on Friday. I do the AFC, and Danny and Rivers are writing the NFC.
All right. Aaron Schatz.
We're kind of hoping internally for San Francisco, New England, because Danny, one of my assistant editors, is a hardcore Niners fan, and that would be great if our teams played in the Super Bowl. Who knows?
We'll talk to you on the next Smart Guy Wednesday. As always, a pleasure. Aaron Schatz, talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.